kink videos that I want to talk about, and I'm really loving. I know a lot of you said you really appreciated. Um, you want more talks about how kink can be healing, and I know that not only because of where the astrology is placed, but also what the cards have been saying. I mean, in the Divine Feminine reading, especially, it talks about sacral chakra healing and sexual healing and things like that. So I'm like riding that energy. I'm like, let's do it. Regulators, mount up, right? And I was actually, Spirit put a book right in my face that was so perfect. I was like, oh, that's the book I wanted to write. It's helping me write a different book that I've been working on. But it's called Existential Kink. You might check it out. It's on Audible. I'm loving it. Anyways, it got me to thinking about something that I meant to talk about a while ago. And it's how so, when it comes to the healing powers of exploring kink, one of the things that I found most profound and that I've had some of the most profound conversations with other people about is how when you get into exploring kinks and fetishes, you end up really exploring like radical honesty. You have to get really honest with yourself and any partners that you play with, especially which is really nice if you've been with someone for a while and you've had challenges with honesty or even with yourself. I mean, the radical honest truth is that we all lie and that it's actually okay to lie sometimes, but it's a paradoxical thing. Um, but in order to explore kinks in a safe way, and that's consensual and fully enthusiastic, like as in you know everything, you're fully informed. I mean, you have to learn how to negotiate, which is like including hard limits. Like, what are things that you would never do? And often in the kink community, it's really funny because you'll see it's mostly men, more submissive men than anything else, that will come in and say, "I have no limits." And for anybody who's had any time in kink or who's experienced like the healing power of it, that's like number one red flag, like red flag number one, no limits, because it shows that one, they're likely very inexperienced and they don't really understand that it can actually be dangerous if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. Two, they don't really understand consent, and consent is everything in the kink world. And I mean, it's everything in the rest of the world too. It's a lot of the energy we're dealing with. And three, it's it means a lot of work on the other end that that person typically doesn't recognize. And it's actually kind of fun. Sometimes there'll be some of us, there's some social networking sites for kinky folks, and you see someone advertise like, I want to be someone submissive, I have no limits. And you're like, oh really? So I could like shave off half of your hair and pierce your tongue and put a tattoo on your nose that says something really ridiculous? And they'll be like, oh, well, no, I can't do that because my job wouldn't allow me to. And it's like, oh, you do have some hard limits then. Really, right? And it's because most people associate kink with sex, and that is not necessarily, the two are not, they're not necessarily always together. There are lots of people, in fact, that always separate the two. Like that for them is their hard limit. They never do kinky stuff and sexual stuff at the same time. There are others that mix the two. Some people never mix like romantic relationships and kinky relationships. Like there's all sorts of, it's kind of a build your own sandwich sort of thing. Like you can put it together the way that you like it as long as it is consensual. But if when it comes to first getting into it, there's a lot of learning involved. And that's often, it's funny, it used to be what turned people away was like religious sentiment and things like that. But what actually turns people away now is that there's so much learning to do, especially if you want to play with somebody who can be actually really fun and you want to get into things like you want to really get into it. You need to learn about yourself. Like, what are my hard limits? Am I okay with edge play? Am I okay with playing with other people? And in order to decide, like, do I want to play with other people, you got to learn about jealousy, which I'll do another video about it. But the basics is, we think of jealousy as one emotion when it's actually a collection of attachment traumas that come together to form our insecurities. And we need to learn compersion in order, in fact, we need to learn it in general. just to do healthy shadow work. But we need to be able to learn that in order to explore any sort of other activities. Even, let's just say that you want to take your partner who you are monogamous with, and you want to play in a semi-private venue with them where there will be other people around playing, or maybe they'll be looking at your partner, or looking at you, and your partner needs to deal with that. You have to have a healthy level of compersion, which is a love for seeing other people experiencing love, like appreciating your partner experiencing appreciation from others. And you have to be able to do that in order to have that kind of fun. And what that does then, whether you're in a relationship or not, or you have different dynamics, maybe you're polyamorous or something like that, um, you really have to take a deep look at yourself and figure out, who am I? What do I want to do? What do I want to explore? What am I absolutely against exploring? That's weird. I don't know why I had an alarm set for 12:34 today, but I guess I did. It's 12:34, and 6:11 on the timer. Anyways, you really have to get honest with yourself. For example, I most predominantly consider myself a dom. Now, in the kink community, there's two ways of spelling that. For men or those on the masculine end of the spectrum, it's DOM, and for those on the more feminine end of the spectrum, it's DOMME. And it just means dominant, which is also very confusing for a lot of people. A lot of people will confuse someone who is dominant versus someone who's dominating, and there's very big differences in that, and you also need to look at that. And then I've noticed, especially with those on the masculine end of the spectrum, a lot of them tend to confuse the difference between being a dominant and a primal. A primal is somebody who just really follows their, they like the hunt, and really getting into the lusty part of things, whereas like a dom is much more into the art of seduction. It's about power exchange. And so that's what I mean. Like, you really have to get radically honest with yourself, even when it comes to submission. Like, a lot of people who consider themselves subs are actually they're more just fetishists, kinksters, people who want to explore things, but they want someone in the bedroom to be more in charge. But they know what they want, they know what they like, they know what they won't do, or if you talk to them, they do. A lot of times they'll say, "Oh, I'm submissive and I'm willing to do anything that you want," but not really. And then when you talk to them, it's like, "Oh, but this is only in the bedroom and only sometimes, and I kind of want it to be an FWB thing, and I only like this and that, and this is my sexual orientation." They actually have a whole lot of limitations. And that's why when you see, somebody, or you hear somebody say like, "I have no limits," really what the big sigh about is kind of that, oh man, it's going to be a lot of conversations to get you very clear about what you actually want and will and won't do. But here's the nice thing, especially for those of you interested in these videos and watching, you can take those lessons. Like, you don't actually have to explore kink, but you can take the lessons that come from that and really start to look at yourself and get radically honest about you. You know what I mean? And you can look at, I mean, something as simple as like impact play, which could be sensual spankings. Like, a lot of people, they, in their minds, they take kink and they just go to this really extreme sadomasochistic place. Hello, Elizabeth. And they think of, like, torture scenes and stuff like that. But kink is actually much more about intimacy than it is about pain. And I'll do another video later too, that where I want to talk about like how kink can actually show you how to turn pain into pleasure in positive ways. Um, you know what? Remember that divine feminine reading? It's, we're healing our sacral chakras and sexual energy. We'll find that libido for you. Anyways, one of the great things about kink, like, you can explore the philosophical end of it without ever actually having to go into any of the sexual aspect of it if you don't want to. And the irony is, especially if you've experienced relationships that are very like mainstream religious based, they are actually quite kinky when you look at it, because it's all about power exchange dynamics. Now, the funny thing is, if you take the religious element out of it, you could look into dynamics like female led relationships, right? Or if you look at daddy dom and baby girl kind of thing, like, those are basically the same premises. Sorry, it's the same premise, but you're changing it from being about like, you know, spirit told me to be this way, into being honest and saying, you know what, I like being this way. Like I like being a submissive or a baby girl or a dominant or this. Like, this is a part of who I am, and I embrace that part of who I am. I like it when my partner takes control. I like it when my partner allows me to have control, or I like to have um, a, a spectrum of power exchange throughout the relationship. I like it when my partner takes control in these areas of life, and I like to have control in these areas of life. And rather than like shaming yourself because you have some controlling aspects to your character, to your being, or feeling like your partner is bad because they have some controlling natures to them. Instead, you can say, you know what, we all have areas where we prefer to be in control or we prefer to be passive. And the funny thing is like, I mean, it's all wrapped in with sacral chakra stuff. It's all wrapped in with sexuality because everything is. And that's where Freud is still very popular. You know, he saw the connection that we as human beings, we're freaky. It's just true. But that's another thing to get radically honest about. Like, everything has everything to do with sex and also nothing to do with sex at the same time. It's just, it's all in there. Like, we're a whole experience. It's kind of like saying you could have a physical problem in your body. Like, let's say you have irritable bowel syndrome. Now, if you have irritable bowel syndrome, it's also very likely that you have an energetic problem, and that would be connected to the solar plexus chakra, and it's where your sense of personal power is. And if you have, in having those two, you also likely have an emotional and or psychological challenge. And so all things are connected. You can't have one without the other. And when you look at them as all connected, you get radically honest about who you are and what your problems are, and you really start to address things much more clearly with yourself. Additionally, like, you know, any partner that you get into exploring, I want to say kink, but if you get into, yes, if you explore kink with them, but definitely if you explore radical honesty with them in this sort of way, in like a deeply intimate way, you're going to get to know them on a level that you really wouldn't any other way. I mean, let's go back to the example of like impact play and spankings, right? Most of us, at least in my generation and older, had some form of experience with spankings when we were younger, and it's usually negative. That would be impact, right? Now, as an adult, you can decide that you want to take on the thing that hurt you as a child, but in a way where you are consenting to it. You can control it. You can decide, do you want it stingy or thuddy? Do you want it with a furry flogger or a leather one? Do you want marks or no marks? Do you want it with a person who tells you you're bad or somebody who tells you that you're wonderful? You know, do you want it to be sensual and just all about just bringing the blood up to the surface of the skin so that you're extra sensitive before you do something sexual? Or do you just want it to just be purely about like feeling like you got a deserved punishment for not doing something you set yourself up to achieve? You know, something like that. Like, you can really control. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad this is weird. You're dying. Just go with it. I'm going with it myself. Um, but you can decide to take your power back in that way by deciding, you know, what you want to do. But here's the thing, like, the first couple of times that you get into allowing yourself to do that, like, even if you have completely repressed all of your memories, your gallbladder might shatter, right? You know, well, see, but that's why, like, a sensual spanking might be a whole lot different than an actual, like, full on spanking. But if you were laughing while it was happening, something still might go weird with your gallbladder. You never know. By the way, gallbladder is connection to solar plexus, too. So, right there, personal power, taking back your power. Maybe I'll do that as the next video. Um, But no, like if you once you get into that, let's say you have repressed memories, you don't remember some, the corporal punishment that you went through as a kid, and it, like, even though you don't, it might seem like a good thing to not recall that sort of treatment, but it actually disempowers you, because when you realize that that you've been through experiences like that, and you can face them and claim them and say, that happened to me and it wasn't my fault. I did not have control over it. I did not understand it. Things like that. That's really, really important shadow work that you can do. And when you get into doing impact play, whether you're the top or the bottom, which would be like, example, the spanker or the spanky, you will that stuff will come up, and you're gonna start to see how you punish yourself in life. I mean, we all have sadistic streaks and masochistic streaks, and we all have ways that we punish ourselves or put ourselves in situations that we don't deserve, or keep ourselves from speaking our truths and do things like that. When it's like, if all people do that anyways, why not allow yourself to take control of it and explore it and understand it and say, you know what? Yeah, like smoking, like many things, um, or drinking or other stuff like that. We all have our ways, right? Um, in any case, the this is just one of the great things that getting into kink can do in terms of healing, is when you get into it, you really must become radically honest with yourself, and there are things that will pop up when you start to explore it. Even just say you're just reading about it, you just read about it on a really deep, deep level, and you just imagine these things happening. Like, if you imagine getting a spanking and you think that that would be horrible, I hated that as a kid, that's fine. Nobody's going to yuck anybody else's yum, but just look at that. What scares me about that? If I had a completely consensual partner, who knew what they were doing, they were experienced, they knew stuff about the anatomy, and we've already gone through negotiations. They know my hard limits, my soft limits. We have safe words, all the stuff. If you had all the safe experience all around, what would stop you from exploring that? Is it because you feel like they might lose control and go too far and you couldn't stop it? Is it because you had bad experiences as a kid that had to deal with that? Is it because you just don't know enough about it? Like, there are so many things. And the great thing is, like, you don't have to actually do the thing, but if you get into thinking about those things, which don't typically come up in polite conversation, then you can actually see where you have quite a bit of shadow work to do when it comes to how you were treated as a kid, the kinds of things that you allow yourself to get into. Like, maybe you find that you always get into relationships with controlling men or women that in unhealthy ways. It could be that your mother or father or both, or another adult figure when you were growing up, was very controlling in a negative way. And when you're a kid, you don't have any control over that. And that conditions you psychologically to put yourself in situations where you are constantly being controlled by others, because that's what you then form as the unconscious version of safety. And until you see that and you can face that, you continue to end up in dynamics with people who are like that. You continue to recreate and replay the traumas that you went through when you were a kid. And that's where a lot of people end up going when they get into kink. A lot of people just get into it these days. It's because they read or watched 50 Shades of Grey or something, and then thought, oh, well, I want to explore that, that looks fun. But then they find out that, wow, this is a much deeper rabbit hole than I ever expected, but I'm better for it. I'm going to leave this here, and I think I'm going to do one more video, and we'll do some other stuff later. Thank you so much for watching, liking, sharing, subscribing. Oh, a question. Uh, how can I even perceive of concepts when every partner I've been with can't handle me for very long? You know what? That's a very good thing to sit down and look at, because that's a self-worth thing. Look at the language that you're using. You're saying, each partner I get with can't handle me for very long. As long as you believe that, then that is true. And I don't mean it in a judgment way. I mean it in a manifestation way. Like what we think most often is true, and how we talk about ourselves most often is true. And so, like, if you know, I used to have a belief. I still work through it sometimes. That that my partners only got with me to experience what it was like to genuinely be loved and to learn to face themselves, only to leave me and then have wonderful relationships with the next person. Which I realized after a while was complete bullshit. And because, like, for one, I didn't know much about rebound relationships or the psychology of rebounds and things like that. And I didn't realize that they were completely fucking lying when they would leave, when I would have enough, or they, and they would leave, and then they would end up like saying they were going to get married to the very next person they were with, usually in less than a year. And I didn't know anything about displacement. I didn't know anything about the way that like relationship psychology works. And I know far more about it now to go, oh, actually, here's the irony. Like, yes, they did learn a lot from me. And when they left, they realized how much they screwed up. And it was created such an incredible amount of dissonance in their brains that they couldn't face themselves. And that because they didn't want to really look at the fact that they created the problems. Oh, in the that's funny. Well, let me finish this thought and then I'll address that one. But because they didn't want to face themselves, and they didn't want to really acknowledge that they were the ones that created the bigger problems in the relationship. They jumped into another relationship with somebody who was either my exact opposite or exactly like me, and tried to convince themselves that they could just basically continue where we were, like where we left off with the next person, and then it would all be just fine. Now, they didn't know that they were doing that, but they did that. And every one of them, the relationships that they got into after me that I used to associate, that were like, oh, well, fine, leave me in the dust, and now you're going to have a great relationship using all the things that I taught you, middle fingers all over the place. No, it actually wasn't like that. And they all ended up coming back to me telling me that I was right, and they were sorry, and that they really feel bad that they screwed it up, and that they see how wonderful it was to be with me, that the grass wasn't greener, that all that glitters isn't gold. Now, to segue into what you're talking about in terms of like guys don't last long in bed, um, I might have to do another video about it. That's not a you thing. I'm still going to stick to the premise that I was saying is as long as you hold that belief, it is true. And so it's more about like, I'm always going to bring it back to self focus. Like, that's what I do with myself. That's what I do with people that I coach. I always bring it back to self. If you believe that, it is true. So, what beliefs can you play with that could also be true? Like, yeah, sure, they don't last long, but you can easily say it is also true that you often attract guys who are very excited to be with you. Like, they find you that attractive, and that, they have a hard time holding it in. Now, here's the other thing, and I think I'll make this a different video, but a lot of men have a common psychological fear that they're going to prematurely ejaculate, or they're not going to last long enough, or etc. Right? Um, yeah. See, right? You're totally hot. Like, dude, the guys can't help it, right? Um, but the thing is it's that part is not us. That's mostly them. Like, if it happens the first couple of times, it's kind of adorable, because then, yeah, you can go, see, I'm such a babe, right? But if it keeps happening, then it's more to do with them. That's shadow work for them to do, and it's what it is it's triggering shadow work for you to do. But you can, you can get into exploring other things. One of my favorite kinks to explore is called edging, and it's effectively taking a man to the point where he's very close to climax, and then bring it back down, not letting him get there. And a lot of guys do this on their own, or you can do it with them and things like that. And it helps to build that ability to last longer. And it actually, the funny thing is it can, if you do that with the partner, you can actually show them just how long that they can last, that they can have multiple orgasms really fast after each other. They don't need the typical 20 to 30 minute refractory rest period in between things. And like that really builds their confidence too. And like you can, when you get into exploring that, like that, especially for men, because we don't typically have that problem, both fortunately and unfortunately. And not that we can't explore edging, but it's not necessarily a confidence builder thing for us. Like ours is more about how to get there faster and still enjoy it. But for, both men and women and anyone on the binary in terms of how your genitalia works to get towards orgasm is that it's all connected to emotions. It's all connected to emotions. So any sort of challenges, whether it's too fast, too slow, doesn't happen, can't connect, all of that stuff has to do with self-esteem, self-worth, where your emotions are you in the moment, how's the set and setting, things like that. And all of that is changeable depending on what you believe is true. Like if you believe that, what, you could just change it to a belief of like, I'm such a hot babe that like you could play with this. Like I've had fun with this on some of the dating apps, is like, just, tell a guy, like, what, I totally am down for connecting with you. You seem like a great person. I connect with you emotionally. But you see, I have this problem. I am such a babe, and my body is just so amazing that the guys I get with, they don't typically last very long. Even if they say that they do and they can go all night and all that stuff, they just don't. And so I want you to learn about edging, and I want you to do this with yourself. And then maybe if we get far enough and you like it, we could do that together, and then we can see where it goes from there. But I'm really all about not accepting any less than I deserve. So I want you to be willing to explore yourself in order to be able to explore me, and we can have a really, really pleasurable experience at that time. You know what I mean? Like you could really play with it, and especially like, right, you're right. See, if you have to do it yourself anyways, then what's the point of getting there? Like you could apply that as a boundary that you have when you're exploring soulmates or dating or things like that. Is like, what, if I'm gonna have to go home and take care of myself anyways, then I might as well only accept such interactions with guys who are actually willing to go the extra mile and not just be like a two pump chump. And when you do that, you will start to notice that you are attracting a higher vibration of guys who, one, are willing to explore themselves and in a healing way, two, who are being, see, right? You are the best lover you've ever had, and that will always be true. And that's also going to be true for anybody that you're with. But more than likely, if you're attracting guys who are who just don't last very long, they probably have not explored themselves very much, and they're probably got an association that just that simple connection is the same as love, is the same as intimacy, and they really haven't explored it all that deeply. And again, getting back to the premise of the video, is that that's why kink can be so profoundly healing. And if you get into it and you like it and you're proud of yourself for it, then anybody that you interact with, they're going to have the ripple effect on them, that they're going to I'm glad that you're in a good mood, and I'm glad I'm making sense, because sometimes I wonder. You create that ripple effect, and even if you only talk to them once or twice, or you only have some small interactions with them, you're going to have that effect on them. They're going to have to be honest with themselves, and then they're going to have that effect on others, and then you create a world where people are much more radically honest. All right, I'm going to end this video here before you have any more great questions. Feel free to put them in the comments below though, because I'd love to do other videos about them. And it's great, especially if the comments are coming when you're in a good mood. And same for everybody else watching now or watching later. I will catch you in the next video.